Now we get to the matter on ground. Today we are stepping into a conversation that goes to the very core of Nigeria's democracy, the safety of journalists and the growing tensions between press and those in power. In recent days, a senior government official, the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory, Barrister Nyesom Wike, made a deeply troubling remark. Now, a lot of journalists have reacted to this and suggesting that Nigeria may be, while the journalists rather suggesting during a program that Nigeria may be drifting towards a one-party state, the minister said he was so angered that if he could, he would have shot through the TV to shoot at this journalist. That statement has since followed an apology. According to the journalist in question, many argue that the damage has already been done. Civil society groups and media institutions and journalists across the country have condemned that remark, calling it outrightly reckless. Well, historically, Nigerian journalists have faced harassment such as this, arrest, and in some cases, outright violence. So this is not happening in isolation. Nigeria's press freedom record has been under scrutiny. I mean, from the dark days of military rule under figures like Sani Abacha, where journalists were jailed and silenced, to recent concerns around the laws like the Cyber Crimes Act to target reporters, the struggle for a free press has been nothing but linear. According to Global Watchdogs as Reporters Without Borders and Committee to Protect Journalists, Nigeria continues to record cases of intimidation, unlawful detention, and harassment of journalists. This pattern is clear. When those in power use threatening languages, it does not just reflect personal anger, it signals a broader environment where press freedom can be undermined. That is what we'll be discussing on today's edition of Razep Africa. And in the studio with me is Achike Ajud. Thank you so much for being part of today's edition. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Right. He is the National Secretary of the Nigerian Union of Journalists. I guess the first question would be, when you saw this play out, before the noise, like Nigerians, we jumped at it and it created the normal reaction or condemnation from everywhere. What came to mind, considering and capturing our history so far?
Yeah, not so much a surprise. If you look at the trajectory where we are coming from 1999 till date, we have seen all manners of attitudes and behaviors by the political actors that have not been compatible with the tenets and the ideals of democracy itself. And so, of course, we have some politicians that are more obnoxious than others. We have some that tend to want to hog the media light, and that's even the contradiction, really. They must be in the news. They want the news to be about them. The Minister of the Federal Capital Territory is somebody that sometimes you wonder whether he can exist without
the media.
Without the media, whether if he's not in the media space for 2 days consecutively, whether he will not feel very, very uncomfortable, you know, and a little bit maybe.
And unfortunately, irrespective of the narrative.
Yeah, of course. So he's given to this kind of language. He's given to this kind of behavior. But when he does that in the political arena, the media can only report it. We tend to look away and say, well, this is typical Wike. And we've had, and in that sense, it's colorful. Not from any, I'm not talking from any value perspective, whether positive or negative and all that. We've had others too, like him. Ayo Fayoshe, you know, former governor of Ekiti State, was also like that too. Very brash, you know, and he says whatever he wants to say. It causes a lot of consternation in the civil populace. It dies down only for him to come up with another controversial statement. So Wike works in that step. And he's always gotten away with it. Perhaps that is what also emboldened him. He's been involved in, of course, as a politician, first and foremost, he's a politician. So his politics brought him out, in River State, and then even the Federal Capital Territory. But there's one irony there, and I think I was trying to make a case in a sister TV station too, that everything that Wike is today, his successes, if you use successes relatively, are also down to the media. Because the media was with him in River State, highlighting him, the controversies and the rest. The media has also been with him in the Federal Capital Territory, also highlighting him, his projects, and some of these funny things that he tends to do also. They've always been there. So it is surprising that he has this kind of, if he should have any attitude towards the media, it should be that of gratitude, for what they have for helping to project him all this while. And so it was not so much, like I said, a shock. But we were also very furious and angry. And so you can see the level of, condemnation within the media space. But beyond the media space, we have seen how civil society also responded.
Right.
The threat that he issued to Shehu Kibaloye, of the Channels Television was not a threat for Shehu. Shehu is a representative of the media. That threat was for all of us, even you in the studio, that tended to question your desire, for instance, to want to do your job, to hold the politicians and government officials accountable.
Which fundamentally is the reason we do what we do.
That's why it is provided for in the Nigerian Constitution. That's the primary role of the media. If the media does not succeed in holding the political leadership accountable, the country collapses. And that is why the point has been made several times, in several instances, that if you want to determine the level of freeness of the media, of a country, of a democracy, first of all, determine the level of freeness of the media.
Right.
When the media is relatively free, it's a pointer to the kind of democracy that you're having. And so, if you're now seeing some level of oppressive, tendencies against the media houses and journalists, then you realize that the political space is closing up, or the civil society space is closing up. And believe me, that is exactly what we're seeing. Absolutely. And that's why I think you quoted, was it Amnesty International, was Doctors Without Borders also,
yes,
talked about the fall of Nigeria in terms of the global media ranking. They lost 10 points the very last time, in 2025. So we are 122 out of 180 countries. Then the media rights agenda says that in 2025 alone, there were about 50 attacks on journalists and media houses in the country. So that tells you that there's a growing, intolerance for the journalist and for the role that he has to play, for as stipulated by the Nigerian Constitution. And that is a clear and present danger for our democracy and for our country.
Absolutely. But were you surprised when this news broke and the civil society picked it up and condemned it immediately, demanding a public apology and everything that has happened so far? Were you surprised that the citizenry, those who we do what we do for, weren't supportive? You were here, I was reading a lot of things like you're thinking too much, people are getting too sensitive, it wasn't a personal attack, it was just, he didn't mean it literally, of course he didn't, and all those other dissenting voices. I thought we would have a collective, wholesome support, seeing how wrong this is and how dangerous this trajectory can be.
No, I think the condemnation was general. Of course, there are a few pockets of people who said, no, are you not reading too much into this statement? But I think overall, the overwhelming position of civil society was very clear. They will not tolerate this kind of language from, government officials, from people who are being maintained by taxpayers' money. Same thing with the media. In fact, it was fierce, that period that this backlash lasted. And of course, bodies like the NUJ, we are also, and we are still maintaining that the minister has a duty to apologize
publicly.
Yes,
or
publicly.
even though we've heard about the personal
calling the person involved, and but that's not it, because the insult was to the media.
Exactly.
Like I said, Nyesom Wike is just a representative of every single one of us.
Absolutely. But do you think even if he does that public apology, like you have said, the matter will be resolved, or it opens up another question of deeper concerns?
No. Once he apologizes, because that is the demand that has been made on him, I think people would shoot their sword a bit and wait to see whether he has repented, because it's one thing to apologize now, it's another thing to go back to your old ways.
Do you remember the Femi Fani-Kayode story where a journalist had just asked a simple, very important question? You're moving around in the bid for good governance. Who is bankrolling you? And that brought about another serious
barrage
of honestly, it was embarrassing. It was it hurt the eyes to watch.
Absolutely. I think for that particular incident, he apologized actually publicly also for that particular one, and that was good, but the reality is that there's a mindset that wants to be intolerant of people, pock-nosing, and that's the way they look at it, because you see, the state of things in this country tends to give the politicians, this culture of impunity tends to give the politicians this impression that they can do anything and get away with it. Therefore, if they have been doing it, who are you, to come and ask them questions that they consider personal? But how can you ask a public official a question that is personal when all you want to do is to find out how he's performing in public office? It's not his office. And so that gives you an idea again of the level of their understanding itself of democracy, which they say they are practicing. And some of us will argue, really, that what you have today is not democracy. Because it is, the change of governance, from the military to civilian only heralds something positive, hopefully. But it is not an indication that you have a democracy. Because some of the worst dictators in the African continent have been Democrats, people who are masquerading as Democrats, who came to power, through, an electoral process. And then we saw what happened. At a time, Mobutu Sese Seko was running elections in Congo Kinshasa, and we saw the kind of elections that they were running.
Exactly.
You talk about the man in Uganda, Museveni, outright dictator. Bobby Wine has traveled, has gone out of the country, has escaped for fear of his life. We have the Baba in Cameroon, over 200 years. Well, that's an exaggeration, but you know what I'm talking about. He is there, absolute dictatorship. He runs elections. So some of the elections that are being run in the African continent,
I'm not sure he even understands what's going on.
Exactly. And because, by the time, during the last election, people were carrying his pictures and moving from street to street to campaign for him. Pictures. What happens when in the marketplace, when a member of the market, of a market association, dies, what they do is that they come up with.
From store to store.
That was the image that came to that was the image that came to and that's what we saw in Cameroon. It's a farce. So that's why we are shouting. Because, there's a saying, if you give them an inch, they take a yard. Give them a yard, they take a mile. We don't want them to take a mile.
But that brings me to my next question. This is something we have tolerated in the media for so long. We've had, sometimes just go to an event and see how reporters and correspondents are treated by those who even invited you to this same event. Yeah. Look at the way they treat you in spite of the Freedom of Information Act. See the way they treat a journalist that says, please, can I have an opportunity to address this issue? Some of them, most of the time, we're talking to someone whose job it is to actually make it open that situation. We hear them use the most unprintable words and, ignore you. There are so many ways we have tolerated instances like this. what can we do moving forward? You know, using this case that has happened as a case, as a benchmark sort of to get better treatment, to ensure that the respect for the media is once again upheld.
Yes, you know why some of these things happen the way they are happening. I'll just tell you, it's the way and manner these people get to office. First of all, a lot has to do with the process that brings them to public office. And you can see the whole noise about the Electoral Act. Mm-hmm. You know, the fact that a lot of Nigerians believe that, like a former rec in Akwa Ibom, Barrister Mike Igene says that it's the worst in the history of the country. Since 1999 today, that is the worst Electoral Act. You know, because there are so many booby traps and all that. So the reason why the politician behaves the way he behaves, the reason why he does not feel that he's accountable to the people is simply because he believes that if the process is manipulated enough, he will not need the power of the people that they exercise through their votes through in an election. So once we're able to change that narrative, then they'll be very, very careful about their image, because their image ultimately translates into the position people will take with regards to them, whether to vote for them or to vote them out of power. You know, so we need to also, that is the background. So we need to be able to get to a level where the people will matter. And when the people matter, then they will realize that one of the most important institutions to get to the hearts and mind of the people is the media. Then they have no choice than to treat the media right. Because once the media exposes their shenanigans and what they do, and people have a different or a negative impression about them, then the tendency is that they will send them packing in an electoral process. That's the power of the media. Because they are very much aware that the media is very powerful and instrumental in shaping minds, in setting an agenda. So when they have done their work sufficiently well and they set agenda, they shape the minds of the people, and then there's an electoral process that matters because the votes of the people will matter, then they realize that their hands, that their fate is in the hands of the media.
As it always is, really.
People. Yeah.
But let's talk about the legal protection for journalists, because this is one more aspect of our job that was exposed by these happenings. What do you think? I mean, following the Cyber Crimes Act and all the laws that we have, particularly for journalists, what are those legal protections for journalists that we can always run to? And I mean, I'm talking and I'm smiling because when you also look at our judicial sector, it's also shrouded by so much. But you get where I'm going with this.
Yeah, well, again, when you talk about a democratic space that is not working, you're talking about everything within that space. And so it is good that you also mentioned the media. I mean, when you have a lot of fundamental contradictions within the polity, you find out that there's virtually no sector of the political economy of the country that would work properly. So now we're talking about the media. We also must acknowledge the fact that the media is not perfect. The media makes its mistakes. You have media practitioners that are not living up to their oath of, in terms of their journalistic, the search for journalistic excellence in the work that they do. But the vast majority of journalists have and know what their job is all about, and they try to do that. You know, so when you now talk about what was the question again? There was
talking about the legal.
The legal protection. So when you talk about, I think you just mentioned it, the Cybercrime Act. Also is something that the media, the NUJ, and the other media-related organizations have been talking about seriously, and that we have said, look, they tried to tinker with it some time ago, but what they came up with is not still the best. You know, you cannot constrain the media because we feel that the media is constrained. When you put too many rules and regulations, do's and don'ts, and then the media person will be tiptoeing in order to carry his or her duties, and that is not good for the flourishing of Nigeria's democracy. So some of these, matters should be removed. Besides, why talk about, defamation in the Cybercrime Act? What is the basis of that? Because we have always maintained that this country has laws, And so if you go through the books in this country in terms of the laws, the various laws and all that, there are adequate laws that address the issue of defamation of character. You don't need the Cybercrime Act to also talk about it because it's already there, everybody talk about it. We all know about it. We are not saying that the individual should be without protection when he is slandered, when his reputation has been sullied by perhaps a journalist that was not careless in doing his job. But at the same time, there are laws, that are violated by journalists, and that have to do with defamation in the normal, not in the Cybercrime Act. And then you expect that those people can go to court and make a case for themselves. But you don't need to now begin to look for a way to hound a journalist and the rest. And sometimes, part of the Cybercrime Act, they say, well, if you also have to record somebody, you must put the person on notice, otherwise it will be a crime.
Yeah.
How is the journalist supposed to do his work? Because sometimes when you talk about investigative journalism, it entails also snooping. It entails, recording for the good of the society.
Right.
For the interest of the Nigerian state and the people. So it entails some level of clandestine monitoring and surveillance of certain people that you are investigating in the name of journalism. So you cannot outlaw it. And if you outlaw such things, it means the impression that you are giving is that we need to do this to protect ourselves from them. Because these are the people that make the laws. They are the ones that usually violate these laws. So there's this feeling that sometimes when they make these laws deliberately to protect themselves. So that they don't fall, so that the journalist, if he's not careful, he falls foul of these laws.
But instances like that, how do we fight it? Because like you said, some of these activities requires clandestine monitoring. And if I have to tell you, listen, I'm about to record as you're going to do this, why would you do it in the first place?
Exactly.
So how do we collectively fight some of these clauses?
Yeah, well, the thing is that we need to keep on at it because, look, freedom is not a tea party. And the road to freedom, a lot of is strewn with all kinds of pebbles and stones and challenges and all that. And so civil society organizations have been talking all this while. So we also need to continue to link up with them, collaborate with them so that we can continue to amplify our voices and put pressure on lawmakers to do the right thing. It's a struggle, so it's not, this does not come on a platter of gold. Because by the time you fight for certain things, you are putting some people at a disadvantage who are also benefiting from those things, even though those things are very wrong. Now you are fighting it to right the wrong, but for some of those people, it's all about doing wrong in order to gain certain interests. Exactly. And so when you try to do some of those things, you work diametrically opposed to their own interests, and they will go out of their way to see how they can deal with you. Those are part of some of the risks that the journalist also has to face. And so we need to change the law itself. We need to put sufficient pressure on the lawmakers and the government officials to also see that this is not good for our democracy at the end of the day. Because it's not about protecting the media. It's about protecting the nation state. And once you protect the media, you protect the nation state.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've gone half hour into the conversation. We're still discussing threats, apologies, and accountability. Is Nigeria becoming hostile to press freedom? That's the conversation we're having, and we're going for a short break. There's still so much to discuss. 2027 is just right by the corner, and so much is going on. The polity, as it's typical here in the country, is often very high, and it's becoming concerning. A lot of people are saying, do we have institutional mechanisms to protect the media as elections are coming? That's what will come up next. Stay with us. This is Razep Africa.
Welcome to Razep Africa, the heartbeat of the continent in one show.
Welcome back. This is Razep Africa, where we are still discussing the press freedom, and elections are just by the corner. As I was saying earlier, how do we ensure that journalists are safe? We do not have more of the instance that we mentioned earlier, where we saw the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory says such damning words towards a journalist, and by extension to all of us, a threat to all of us. So are you concerned that elections are coming? Often this is where everything is rife. If there were threats before, now they are doubled, and we see contestants and who come and want to, their side to be taken. If you, for any reason, spit out facts that does not seem to paint them in good light, then you are the enemy, and that is often what is promulgated in the media or in this space. So are you concerned?
Of course, I will be concerned because, again, we have been talking about the background or the context under which this is happening. And you put it rightly when you said that as we get closer to the election, the stakes are so much higher, and then the politicians always very desperate. We do desperate things. And part of the desperate things is to ensure that they have good favorability in the media space. And then if they don't, if there are people that project them in bad light, or in the proper light, but they see it as being projected in the bad light, then they look for ways to deal with them. So it's a worrying period, for journalists, because at that time again you find out that government agencies tend to, especially the law enforcement agencies, tend to bow to the dictates of the political class, and so much when complaints are made, they are not responded to adequately. Though one thing I would say, really, as I have been an election observer for some time in some of the elections in the country, is that usually law enforcement agents, when it comes to the treatment of journalists, it has always been respectful. For the ones I've seen, Anambra, Ekiti, Ondo, and all those other places, they've essentially been quite good. And so, like I said, if there's any group of people that now threatens that, it is the politicians themselves. So we hope that that they can put a lead on their behavior. And I think that is why the Kuka and then Abdul Salam intervention, this their peace initiative,
right.
Where candidates, contestants are brought together on, under one umbrella to sign a peace pact. And their sense is not really because of them, but because of their supporters.
Exactly.
Because even at the best of times, when they want to behave themselves, their reporters might tend to do things or see things differently and behave differently. So the thinking is that if we can get everybody to watch them signing a peace pact, that it might trickle down to their supporters. And that would also put a lead on the prospect for violence against the media and against other people, in an electoral process.
Even though you would agree with me that immediately after that peace pact, especially during the last general elections, we saw a lot of those same contestants peel out.
No. Oh, I mean, obviously, look, the issue that's also a point because in as much as in general terms you say yes in some elections, again, the ability for government institutions and the law enforcement agents to behave sometimes in an election is dependent on the nature of that and character of that election.
Absolutely.
There are some elections where the stakes are not so high, where winners are already known, possible winners, potential winners are already known by the populace. Everybody knows who is popular and all that, and who is likely going to win. In that instance, there is usually no heavy contestation. But where you have heavy contestation, where the contestants more or less, or the competitors are more or less matched, almost evenly, you can be sure that the political tempo is exceedingly high. And when the political tempo is high, the tendency to introduce violence is always there. Yeah. And once you introduce violence within that process, journalists end up also bearing the brunt, apart from the ordinary people. Because when they are there to film what is going on, they are there to record what is going on. So sometimes when they are misbehaving and they are creating chaos and violence in that process, any journalist that is on site becomes a victim if care is not taken. Same thing with even protests. Journalists go there not to participate. because they are not part of
part of any of the sites or
their
the
own
protest.
is to go there and tell the people that this is what is happening or this is what has happened, you know. And in the process, sometimes the violence is visited upon them by state agencies and state agents, security agencies and all that. We have seen that happen several times. So we hope that in those volatile areas where journalists are likely going to be more at risk, that there will be more, heavier deployment of security for the purpose of protecting the media. And there should always be a hotline, essentially, where the security agencies tend to give it at least in their engagements with civil society. They give their numbers, to some of these observers and say, look, if there's any problem, just call this number. And then we no time we get to you. We hope that that is the same engagement that they have with the media. We also have to see and be sure that they have this engagement with the media, so that wherever the media, is doing their job, especially in during the electoral process, and they call, it will be treated as an emergency, and that a response will be dispatched immediately. That's what we hope will happen. And
you're right. Thankfully, we have more partnerships. We are seeing institutions reach out to the media to strengthen partnerships, just so that both institutions and partners will have a seamless work. But still speaking about elections and the processes for elections, how can we, insulate ourselves more? Because we keep talking about the compromise that comes. We want to, be as non-partisan as we can. However, we also see where I don't know if it's a new wave of journalism where people, practitioners are getting involved, sometimes so emotional that it shows. So how can we...
Yeah, that's where the professionalism comes to play. That's where their training comes to play. Obviously, we take sides one way or the other, even if we don't show it.
Yeah, and we aren't supposed to show it.
No, yeah, exactly, exactly, because we are human beings. That factor is always there. That among the political gladiators, again, should we be interested? We should be interested because ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about our country.
Exactly.
It's about our ability to live normal lives, and we also know that the political process could help bring about a new dawn where things could be better for us. Therefore, we're engaged. Therefore, there's the possibility that you could feel as a journalist that this particular candidate, I think, will be good for us, for this country, and therefore will be good for me too, and my family and all that. So it's always there. But when you are doing a report or finding a report, you must also realize that you must be balanced. So even if you cover your own person, and the Nigerian Broadcasting Organization, the NBC, also talks about it all the time. And there are rules of engagement that they make clear to all the media houses. There must be some level of coverage of political actors. You cannot give a particular person 60%, 70% airtime. You must look for a way to give even the smaller political parties, airtime. This is the only way we can, as much as possible, try to be objective, try to be balanced. Exactly. You must listen to the other side, so that these things also help.
But do we also have punitive measures that deter journalists from flouting what you just said? Because, like I'm sure you've also stumbled on those channels and those platforms that are out from the word go, from when you tune in, whose side this is. We all have editorial leanings, but every media house should maintain, like you said, balance. So, are there punitive measures? Elections are coming. Just so that we will not inadvertently, direct the public to something that is just a personal bias.
No, the media. You have the media ombudsman. You have, Nigeria Press Council. You have the Nigerian Union of Journalists. You have the Guild of Editors, and so on. These are platforms that. When you have a deviation from the norm by some journalists when they misbehave, you get in touch with these institutions to call, them to order. Your members to order. So this is also part of the control outlets that we have. It's also very, very important, And I know that we need to do our job in that direction to ensure that we can exercise some level of decent control over our people. And then the punishment, it depends, maybe at the individual level, at the organizational level. Some time ago, the NBC, in fact, they have this tendency to wield the big axe on the media organizations, and then some people went to court, obviously, and then they had a resounding victory, and that a lot of journalists were happy about, where you close down a media house because they did a particular kind of report that you feel was biased and the rest, and you find them, a lot of money as punitive damages. But the court has said no, you do not have the right to do that. That is good news, But at the same time, we also expect, for instance, there was a problem an issue involving Daily Trust, and some reports that they did, and some reports that were not true. So that's also one way of checking some of these things. When a complaint is made, to some of these media organizations, these bodies, Newspaper Proprietors Association, for instance, is also a pressure group, and others. Then we expect that the media house, should be called to order. And if they need to apologize, they apologize. And that was what Daily Trust did. They might not have liked the fact that they had to apologize. But you see retractions from time to time, or
exactly.
On the pages of newspapers or media organizations when they make mistakes. Even the big organizations, like CNN, for instance, on some reports that they do, they retract. Once they know that they have misinformed the public, they have a duty to properly inform them and to apologize for the mistake that they made. So these are some of the things. And I think that with a sense of, if we have a proper sense of responsibility, we should know how to go about some of these things. We know, again, that we find ourselves in this situation because a lot of some media houses are owned by people who are interested parties, politicians themselves, So sometimes it's difficult for the editor, for instance, to look at the owner of the business who pays him his salary that he uses to look after his children, pay school fees and the rest. It becomes very difficult to look at Oga, in the eyes and say, I'm not going to do this. You can only say that if you've made up your mind
to leave that
organization,
right.
And then you have something else to stand by. So that control that they have tends to put a lot of pressure, on them to look away. To look away, so they allow things that under normal circumstances they should not allow. So it needs people with integrity, people who understand the job, people who are respected, to be able to gently explain to the owner that this is interference with the media. So it's not always an easy.
But is it also a threat to press? Is it also a threat to true reporting when a large number of media houses are owned by politicians at the moment? And of course, there's also a certain stereotype that Nigerians have of public-owned, government-owned media platforms. So you're torn between, okay, should I listen to the government-owned? Of course, government-owned platforms too.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. You're talking about private media houses owned by political actors who play a role in the politics, and then you also have organized public institutions owned by governments, and these governments are headed by politicians also.
Exactly.
So at the end of the day, it's about interest.
Who has the control?
Yeah. But there's something that happens. Sometimes I grant interviews to these public institutions. So what I do is that in talking, in granting this press interview, I'm usually more watchful of my words, because I'm also aware that the media practitioner who is interviewing me could get into trouble if I say certain things that I'm not supposed to say.
And by not supposed to say, it's not because they are not factual, but because it may affect the sensibilities of the owner.
No, I have always, I don't allow anybody to intimidate me. I'm not paying me salaries. That's one thing I can tell you. I don't allow anybody. I say what I have to say, but I think I was referring to the language I use and the way I say it. I say it, with respect in the continental language, but I say it even if
nonetheless, right.
Nonetheless, so I do not have to. And in fairness to them, you'll be surprised. Some of the government, radio houses, they carry it. When you disagree over this issue with Wike and the rest, the position of the NUJ was carried, by some of these government-owned, it's media institutions. They carried it the way it was. We condemn this that has happened. And again, also know that even though, yes, they are working for government, they know that the NUJ position tallies with their own position, because it's also about protecting themselves.
Exactly. And they're members of the...
And they're members of, yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we're running out of time, so I'd just like to quickly ask, what role should international organizations and partners play in this? Because while it irritates me, I'm seeing the call for international support in what's going on. And while you're answering that, if you have the opportunity to hammer on one reform that will prioritize press freedom in Nigeria, what would it be?
That's a big one. The position, the role of international organizations. I think, look, the world became a global village a long time ago. So what happens in one country affects
the other, right?
And that's why you have an organization called Reporters Without Borders, because there's a common thread that links all reporters together. So it's one global family of fraternity. And so we expect them to continue to engage, and that they engage beautifully, even with the Wike thread. Amnesty International immediately issued a release, and some other international organizations that say we cannot tolerate this, because we know the attack on a journalist here is an attack on the journalist, on everybody, because it's the same motivation that groups have. Individuals have all over. Sometimes for personal interest, they want to stifle stories. They want to stifle reports that must go out there, to the public space and all that. So we need to keep on working together and collaborating. And I think we're doing that. There are trainings to, that some of them organize. Media people, go, they attend it and they learn a lot and they are rich. And then the reform, if there's one major well, I wish. It might not be a reform in that sense, but I wish that journalists would be treated much better.
Right.
I wish that their businesses, that the media houses where they work will thrive, and then as they thrive, I wish that, that the journalist gets his money's worth or her money's worth, because they do so much and they get so little. And then, so I just hope that they can be better appreciated, because they are also economic, beings too. Absolutely. They have needs. And they want to do this job. They don't want to find themselves in a situation where they have to compromise their standards.
That's true.
Because, for whatever reason. So we want the welfare of journalists. So if we can have something, a policy or whatever it is that would ensure that there could be better welfare and remuneration for journalists across board, not for public institutions alone, but for private, media houses too. And I think that that's one thing that will gladden me, because you take care of them better, then they're in a better position for them to flourish and to do their work much more.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's true. Thank you so much for being part of the program. I hope this isn't the last time you'll be here. We'll be calling you more. There's so much to discuss around the media, especially in Nigeria. And as the elections move closer, please give us time.
We will see.
We would do that. Thank you so much. That has been Chud Ajike, National Secretary to the Nigerian Union of Journalists. And this is it for the conversation today here on RAZEB Africa. We've been discussing the press freedom, how we can do better, all of us. Threats to one press person is threats to all of us. So let's be informed and let us appreciate those who work so hard to make sure that this information is brought to us seamlessly. Until next time when I come your way, have yourself a wonderful rest of the day.